Mentioned orders. This week's killed in action. Staff Sergeant First Class Nicholas Sparity, 36 of West Virginia, killed during a parachute accident exercise before deployment. Staff Sergeant Joshua Baraka, 29 of Sacramento, California, was killed during a pre-deployment vehicle accident. Specialist Jeremy Griffin, 36 of Crawfordsville, Indiana, ended his own life after battling with PTSD. Corporal Tylee Wallingford, 21 of Maine, was shot by a fellow Marine during a dispute on Marine Air Station Base in Beaufort, South Carolina. Local and Indiana veterans that have served and passed. Sherwin Zook, U.S. Air Force. Paul Fletcher, U.S. Army. Douglas Kelly, Indiana National Guard. Larry Weller, U.S. Navy. William Henning, U.S. Navy. Hubert Kennedy, U.S. Air Force. L.J. Lospech, U.S. Army, Korea. Eugene Hoshin, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Robert Court, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Herman Weinert, U.S. Navy, World War II. James Hepler, U.S. Air Force. Richard Stark, U.S. Army, World War II. Paul Weishart, U.S. Navy, Korea. Mark Hetchker, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Jerry Joe Elliott, U.S. Army. Robert Heathington, U.S. Navy, World War II. James Roth, U.S. Marines, Vietnam. Marshall Dieter, U.S. Marines, World War II. Donald Losh, U.S. Marines. Joseph Hake, U.S. Navy. Harold Hagen, U.S. Navy, World War II. John Marchland, U.S. Navy. Ralph Ryler, U.S. Army Air Corps, World War II. Richard Dills, U.S. Army. William Wilcox, U.S. Army, Korea. Richard Mayer, U.S. Army, World War II. Dennis Shreve, U.S. Army. Charles Evans, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Charles Pemberton, U.S. Navy. Philip Ashbury, U.S. Army. Harold Ford, U.S. Army. Frank Benedict, U.S. Army. Jerry Joe Elliott, U.S. Army. Kermit Wirt, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Brian Steele, U.S. Army. Donald Lashbrick, U.S. Marines. Max Couch, U.S. Navy, Korea. Denny Freeman, U.S. Army. David McDonald, U.S. Army, Korea. John Kentler, U.S. Navy, Korea. Joseph Gatz, U.S. Navy. Donald Lanning, U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force. Paul Chupar, U.S. Army, Korea. Patrick Bergeson, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Joe Namath, U.S. Air Force. Garwin Stewart, U.S. Army, World War II. Thomas Greenwald, U.S. Air Force. John Smith, U.S. Army. William Caldwell, U.S. Air Force, Korea. Vernon Hopkins, U.S. Air Force. Charles Hicks, U.S. Army, Korea. Veterans from around the nation. Larry Chamot, U.S. Army. Harold Ross, U.S. Navy and U.S. Army. Arthur Weigand, U.S. Navy, Vietnam. Carson Ham, U.S. Army. Billy Martin, U.S. Army. Bobby Nolan. Glenn Novel, U.S. Army. Ralph McElroy, U.S. Army, Vietnam. James Johnson, U.S. Army, World War II. Fred Adams, U.S. Air Force, Korea and Vietnam. Aaron Hildebrand, U.S. Navy. Police and Fire's End of Watch. Rodney Ewing, Indiana State Police. Douglas Barr, Hills Fire Department, Virginia. Charles Graff, Fort Wayne Fire Department, Indiana. Deputy Justin DeRozer, Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office, Washington. Kerry Polk, Leesburg Fire Department. And William Meyer, Jay County Sheriff's Department, Corrections, Indiana. Rosie the Riveters. Margaret Kronowski. Margie Folan. Mildred Ingo, Joanna Knight, Janice Lyon, Virginia Matthews, Maria McCausland, Mildred Miser, Anna McHagan, Rose Rollo, Charlotte Brunson, George Talley, Mary Woodruff, and Rosemary Kausovich. POW and MIAs recently recovered. Navy Seaman Second Class Richard Thomas, 19, of League City, Texas, killed in action aboard the USS Oklahoma December 7th, 1941, buried as unknown in 1949 and accounted for April 16th of this year. Army Captain Rufus Hyman, 23, of Memphis, Tennessee, missing in action July 30th, 1950 in South Korea, remains recovered, buried unknown 1951 and accounted for April 16th of this year. Army Corporal Carlos Ferguson, 20, of Dawson, West Virginia, missing in action May 18th, 1950, the Battle of Soggon River in South Korea, remains recovered unknown in 1951 and accounted for April 16th of this year. Please stand by for a roll call.
Present.
Sergeant Seaston.
Present.
Sergeant Martin.
Present.
Sergeant Jordan. Sergeant John Gordon. Sergeant John Carl Gordon, U.S. Army. Corporal Clark. Corporal William Clark. Corporal William Wade Clark, U.S. Army, U.S. Marine.
Sergeant, our brothers have gone home. They've accomplished their earthly mission. We bid them Godspeed and eternal peace.
Sergeant, all souls present and accounted for. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Praise that. Oh.